Hello students, let us start with the fourth part of the video of chapter The Enemy. Sadao Yumi tells me the servants feel they cannot stay if we hide this man here anymore, she said. She tells me that they are saying that you and I were so long in America that we have forgotten to think of our own country first. They think we like Americans. So here Hannah, she said to Sadao that Yumi told her that the servants would not stay with them if the American man lived there any longer. She also said that Sadao and Hannah had been in America for such a long time that they had forgotten their country's priority. Yumi and the servants thought that Hannah and Sadao liked Americans. It is true, Sadao said harshly. Americans are our enemies, but I have been trained not to let a man die if I can help it. So Sadao he reacted harshly and said that this was not true. He said that Americans were their enemies. He had been trained in such a way that he could not let a man die and would help to save him in whichever way he could. That was what Sadao had done. The servants cannot understand that, she said anxiously. So here Hannah, she said that servants, they will not understand Sadao's intention. No, he agreed. Neither seemed able to say more, and somehow the household dragged on. Dragged on means pulled on, carried on. The servants grew more watchful. Their courtesy was as careful as ever, but their eyes were cold upon the pair to whom they were hired. So, as Hannah said that the servants could not understand Sadao's predicament, Sadao agreed with this. Both of them had nothing more to say. The chores of the house continued, but the servants were vigilant, watchful. They were polite, but unfriendly towards their masters. It is clear what a master ought to do, the old gardener said one morning. He had worked with flowers all his life and had been a specialist too in moss. Moss is a very small, soft green plant. For Sadao's father, he had made one of the finest moss gardens in Japan, sweeping the bright green carpet constantly so that not a leaf or a pine needle marred the velvet of its surface. Pine needle means very thin, sharp leaves that grow on pine trees, and not a leaf of that pine needle marred means spoiled the velvet of its surface, means the velvety surface that was made of moss. So he took great care of it that it doesn't get spoiled uh, even with the leaf. My old master's son knows very well what he ought to do, he now said, pinching a bud from a bush as he spoke. When the man was so near death, why did he not let him bleed? So, in this para, one morning the old gardener said that it was obvious what their master should have done. The old gardener, he had worked with flowers all his life and specialized in moss. He had been employed by Sadao's father. The gardener had made one of the best moss gardens in Japan for Sadao's father. He would sweep the bright green colored carpet of the moss clean so that the sharp leaves of pine tree could not spoil the soft velvety surface. He plucked a flower bud from the bush as he said that his master's son, that is Sadao, knew very well what he was supposed to do. He added that when the man was almost dead, he should have left him to bleed to death. That young master is so proud of his skill to save life that he saves any life. So here the cook he said disrespectfully that their master, he was so proud of his skill at saving lives that he did not bother whose life he was saving. She split a fowl's neck skillfully and held the fluttering bird and let its blood flow into the roots of a wistaria vine. Blood is the best of fertilizers, and the old gardener would not let her waste a drop of it. So the cook, she cut the neck of a hen skillfully and held the bird as it shivered. She let the blood of the hen flow into the wistaria plant. Wistaria plant is a plant that is used for decoration. The old gardener had instructed her that the blood was the best fertilizer for the plants, and he did not allow her to waste a single drop of it. It is the excuse me. It is the children of whom we must think, Yumi said sadly. What will be their fate if their father is condemned as a traitor? Condemned means labeled or sentenced as a traitor, a person who betrays his country. So Yumi was worried about the fate of Sadao and Hannah's children. She wondered that when they grew up, they would be labeled as the children of a traitor. As Sadao was helping an American, all the people of Japan would consider him to be an enemy of Japan, a traitor of his country. They did not try to hide what they said from the ears of Hannah as she stood arranging the day's flowers in the veranda nearby, and she knew they spoke on purpose that she might hear. That they were right, she knew too, in most of her being, but there was another part of her which she herself could not understand. It was not sentimental, means emotional liking of the prisoner. She had come to think of him as a prisoner. She had not liked him even yesterday when he had said in his impulsive means sudden, thoughtless way, anyway, let me tell you that my name is Tom. So here we come to know the name of the prisoner. His name is Tom. She had only bowed her little distant bow. She saw hurt in his eyes, but she did not wish to assuage. Assuage means decrease or reduce it. Indeed, he was a great trouble in this house. So, in this para, as Hannah she stood in the veranda arranging the flowers, the servants they discussed the matter in her presence as they wanted her to know their views about the matter. Hannah also felt that the servants were right, but she had some feelings for the injured man which she could also not analyze. She did not like the prisoner, neither was she attached towards him. The day before the injured man told her that his name was Tom, Hannah did not like him at that moment also. She had reacted by bowing her head mildly. She saw that her reaction hurt the injured man, but she did not want to assuage this hurt that she had caused to him because the injured man was a great trouble to her. His presence was a threat to Hannah and Sadao. As for Sadao, every day he examined the wound carefully. The last stitches had been pulled out this morning, and the young man would, in a fortnight, be nearly as well as ever. Sadao went back to his office and carefully typed a letter to the chief of police reporting the whole matter. On the 21st day of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up on the shore in front of my house. So far, he typed and then he opened a secret drawer of his desk and put the unfinished report into it. So Sadao, he was performing his role perfectly as a doctor. He would examine the wound every day. One morning, the last stitches were removed from the injured man's body, and he would be as well as ever in the next 15 days. Mean in the next 15 days, he would be completely fine to be on his own. In the meantime, Sadao went to his office and wrote a letter to the chief of the police to report the entire matter to him. Sadao started his report and he wrote that on the 21st of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up on the shore in front of his house. Sadao had just typed this much of the report. He opened the drawer of his desk and kept this unfinished report in it. On the seventh day after that, two things happened. In the morning, the servants left together, their belongings tied in a large square cotton kerchiefs, means square piece of cloth. When Hannah got up in the morning, nothing was done, the house not clean and the food not prepared, and she knew what it meant. She was dismayed, means disappointed, and even terrified, but her pride as a mistress would not allow her to show it. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully when they appeared before her in the kitchen, and she paid them off and thanked them for all that they had done for her. They were crying, but she did not cry. The cook and the gardener had served Sadao since he was a little boy in his father's house, and Yumi cried because of the children. She was so grieving, means in a state of sadness, that after she had gone, she ran back to Hannah. So on the seventh day, after that, two things happened. After seventh day, after means when he typed a report to the chief police officer. So after, after that thing, on the seventh day, two things happened. What were they? The servants of the house left in the morning. They had tied their belongings in a huge pieces of cloth. When Hannah got up in the morning, she saw that the work had not been done, the house was dirty, and the food had not been cooked. She realized that the servants were up to something. She was shocked and horrified when she came to know that the servants were leaving. Hannah did not show her feelings to the servants. Instead, she remained calm and maintained her grace as the lady of the house. She paid the servants and thanked them for their services. As the servants had been working there for many years, they were crying, but Hannah did not cry. The cook and the gardener were very old employees. They had been employed by Sadao's father and had served Sadao since his childhood. Yumi was crying because she would miss the children. She was so sad that she ran up to Hannah after she had left. And what she said to Hannah, if the baby misses me too much tonight, send for me. I'm going to my own house, and you know where it is. Thank you, Hannah said, smiling. But she told herself she would not send for Yumi, however, the baby cried. So, as I said, Yumi said to Hannah that if the baby they missed her at night, she could call her. She further added that she was going to her own house and Hannah knew where her house was. Hannah, she smiled and thanked her for the offer, but to herself she said that in case the baby cried, she would not call for Yumi because she did not want to put them in uh, this troubled situation. She made the breakfast, and Sadao helped with the children. Neither of them spoke of the servants beyond the fact that they were gone. But after Hannah had taken morning food to the prisoner, she came back to Sadao. So the next morning, Hannah she prepared the breakfast, and Sadao helped her by looking after the children. Neither of them talked regarding the servants, but after Hannah served the morning food to the prisoner of war, she came back to Sadao, probably to talk something. Why is it we cannot see clearly what we ought to do? She asked him. Even the servants see more clearly than we do. Why are we different from other Japanese? So she wanted to talk to Sadao, and what she said, she was very worried and she questioned that why they were not very clear about what they ought to do. She added that even the servants were very clear as compared to them. She said that why were they behaving differently from other Japanese people. Hannah here wanted to say that as Americans were their enemies, they should not have treated that prisoner of war and they should have let him die just like any other Japanese would have done. Sadao did not answer, but a little later he went into the room where the prisoner was and said briskly, briskly means quickly, "Today you may get up on your feet. I want you to stay up only 5 minutes at a time. Tomorrow you may try it twice as long. It would be well that you get back your strength as quickly as possible." So Sadao, he did not reply to Hannah, but after some time he went into the room where the prisoner of war was resting and spoke very fast. He said, that day the man could get up and stand on his feet. Sadao wanted him to stand only for 5 minutes at a time. Further, he added that the next day he could try to stand for double the time, that is 10 minutes. Sadao also said that it would be good for everyone that the man regain strength as soon as possible. Sadao hinted that they wanted to get rid of the American as early because he had become a cause of trouble for them. He saw the flicker of terror on the young face that was still very pale. "Okay," the boy murmured. Evidently, means clearly, he was determined to say more. "I feel I ought to thank you, doctor, for having saved my life." So Sadao saw that his words brought a hint of terror and scare on the face of the young boy. His face was still very pale and colorless because he was very weak. The boy spoke in a low voice and said, "Okay." It appeared that he wanted to speak something more, but he just said that he wanted to thank Sadao for saving his life. "Don't thank me too early," Sadao said coldly. He saw the flicker of terror again in the boy's eyes, terror as unmistakable as an animal's. The scars on his neck were crimson for a moment. Crimson is bright red color. Those scars, what were they? Sadao did not ask. So Sadao, he was very expressionless when he said that the boy did not need to thank him yet. As he spoke this, he saw that the hint of scare again appeared in the boy's eyes. The writer compares the boy's terrorized eyes to that of a scared animal. The injury marks on the neck of the boy turned bright red in color for a while. Sadao thought that what has caused those injury marks, but he did not ask the boy about them. In the afternoon, the second thing happened. Hannah, working hard on unaccustomed labor, means not used to perform hard work, saw a messenger come to the door in official uniform. Her hands went weak and she could not draw her breath. The servants must have told already. She ran to Sadao, gasping. Gasping means struggling to breathe, unable to speak, unable to utter a word. But by then, the messenger had simply followed her through the garden, and there he stood. She pointed at him helplessly. So that day, the second incident that happened in the afternoon, it was Hannah. She was busy with the household work as the servants had left. All of a sudden, she had to perform all the work which she was not used to. That is why the word unaccustomed labor. Now she was very tired and she saw that a messenger wearing official uniform had come to the house. As she saw him, her hands went weak and she was unable to breathe. This was because she felt that the servants must have told the authorities that they were sheltering an enemy. Hannah ran up to Sadao and she was struggling to breathe. She was unable to speak. By that time, the messenger also followed her through the garden and he stood in front of Sadao. Hannah was helpless and she pointed her finger towards the messenger. Sadao looked up from his book. He was in his office, the other partition of which was thrown open to the garden for the southern sunshine. Southern sunshine here is the door of the office which opened into the garden. It faced the south direction. This means that the sunshine which entered the office was not direct and bright, instead, it was a shady sunshine. So, when Hannah pointed towards the messenger, Sada was reading a book, and when he saw Hannah, he looked up. He was sitting in his office, which had a partition in it. The part of the office beyond the partition opened into the garden and was full of shady sunshine. What is it? He asked the messenger, and then he rose, seeing the man's uniform. So Sadao he asked messenger the matter due to which he had visited them. When he saw the messenger was wearing a uniform, he stood up as a mark of respect. You are to come to the palace, the man said. The old general is in pain again. So messenger he said that the Sadao was supposed to accompany him to the palace. He added that the old general was suffering in pain and Sadao was supposed to visit him and treat him as a doctor. Oh, Hannah breathed. Is that all? All? The messenger exclaimed. Is it not enough? Indeed, it is, she replied. I am very sorry. Upon hearing this, Hannah was relieved and she said, Oh! With this, she took a deep breath and asked, that all for which the messenger had come? The messenger reacted and said, All? He couldn't understand that what else could it be for which he was supposed to visit the house. He asked that was that not enough? Did they want any other reason for him to visit them? Hannah was sorry for her reaction and said that the reason was enough for the messenger to visit them. She did not need any other reason for him to visit them. When Sadao came to say goodbye, she was in the kitchen but doing nothing. The children were asleep and she sat merely resting for a moment, more exhausted from her fright than from work. Exhausted, tired from her fright, from terror than work. So, as Sadao had to accompany the messenger, he went to Hannah to say goodbye. Hannah was in the kitchen, but she was not doing anything. The children had gone to sleep, and Hannah was taking rest. She was more tired due to the scare on seeing the messenger than she was from doing the household work. I thought they had come to arrest you, she said. Hannah, she said to Sadao that she had thought that the messenger had come to arrest him. He gazed down into her anxious eyes. Gazed down means looked carefully. I must get rid of this man for your sake, he said in distress. Somehow I must get rid of him. So Sadao he looked very carefully at Hannah's anxious eyes and he was very sad and distressed and he said that he must get rid of the man for Hannah's sake. He added that he had to get rid of the man by any means. Now Sadao he goes to see the general. Of course, the general said weakly, I understand fully. But that is because I once took a degree in Princeton, so few Japanese have. So here Sadao he narrated the entire story to the general. The general, who was very weak, said that he understood Sadao's position because he had also studied in America at the Princeton University, but there were only a few Japanese who had studied in America. I care nothing for the man, Excellency, Sadao said. So Sadao replied to the general that he did not care for the American man, but having operated on him with such success, but only thing that he had operated upon him successfully. Yes, yes, the general said. It only makes me feel you more indispensable to me. Indispensable means necessary. So general he interrupted him and said, Yes, yes. He felt that Sadao was a necessary part of his life. Evidently, you can save anyone. You are so skilled. You say you think I can stand one more such attack as I have had today? Not more than one, Sadao said. So, as General considered Sadao a necessary part of his life, Sadao, he had been successful at operating on the man. The general felt that Sadao was very skilled. The general asked that did Sadao think that the general had any chance of surviving another heart attack as the one he had that day? Sadao replied that in his opinion, the general could not survive more than one such heart attack. Then certainly I can allow nothing to happen to you, the general said with anxiety. His long, pale Japanese face became expressionless, which meant that he was in deep thought. You cannot be arrested, the general said, closing his eyes. Suppose you were condemned to death and the next day I had to have my operation. So here, General, he said that when Sadao told him that he can only survive one more heart attack, so General said that in that case he could not allow anything to happen to Sadao. He wanted to say that he needed Sadao and so he would protect him. The general's long, weak, yellowish face became expressionless because he was thinking about Sadao being arrested. He became serious, closed his eyes at the thought of Sadao being arrested, and said that Sadao could not be arrested. Further, he added that if Sadao was sentenced to death and he needed an operation the next day, then who would operate upon him? So, the general wanted to say that he needed Sadao and so he would protect him and he would not let anything happen to him. There are other surgeons, Excellency, Sadao suggested. None I trust, the general replied. The best ones have been trained by Germans and would consider the operation successful even if I died. I do not care for their point of view, he sighed. It seems a pity that we cannot better combine the German ruthlessness with the American sentimentality. Then you could turn your prisoner over to execution, and yet I could be sure you would not murder me while I was unconscious. The general laughed. He had an unusual sense of humor. As a Japanese, could you not combine these two foreign elements? He asked. Ruthlessness means harshness, and sentimentality means being emotional. So he wanted the to combine the German harshness with Americans being emotional. So here Sadao, firstly he suggested to the general that there were many other surgeons in Japan. To this, general replied that he did not trust anyone else other than Sadao. He added that the best surgeons had been trained by the Germans, and for them, the operation would be successful even if the general died. He did not care for their point of view. The general added that the Japanese could not combine the harsh nature of the Germans with the emotional nature of the Americans. So the general wanted to say that they did not have such persons who could combine the harsh nature of a German and the emotional nature of an American. He said that if they would have been able to do that, then Sadao could be harsh and could turn the prisoner to the Japanese and at the same time be emotional and not murder the general during the operation. With this, the general laughed. The writer says that the general had a strange sense of humor. He was very witty. Then he asked Sadao that being Japanese, could he not combine these two foreign elements? So the foreign elements to which the general is referring is the harsh nature of a German and the emotional nature of an American. Sadao smiled. I am not quite sure, he said, but for your sake I would be willing to try, Excellency. So Sadao smiled at the general's question and said that he was not quite sure about it, but for his betterment he was willing to try it out. The general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case, he said. So, General, with his head down, said that he did not want to be such a person on whom a new trial would be made. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life as an official in times such as these when repeated victory brought great responsibilities all over the South. Pacific. So, overwhelmed means full of emotions, cares of his life means problems and responsibilities that he faced during his life. South Pacific is the part of the Pacific Ocean that lies in the southern hemisphere. So, saying this, General, he felt weak and emotional as he was reminded of the problems he had faced throughout his life while fulfilling his duties and responsibilities in various wars won by Japan. It is very unfortunate that this man should have washed up on your doorstep, he said irritably. I feel it too myself, Sadao said gently. The general was irritated and he said that the happening of the injured man reaching Sadao's house was an unfortunate one. Sadao also agreed with him. It would be best if he could be quietly killed, the general said. Not by you, but by someone who does not know him. I have my own private assassins, means professional killers. Suppose I send two of them to your house tonight, or better, any night. You need know nothing about it. It is now warm. What would be more natural than that you should leave the outer partition of the white man's room open to the garden while he sleeps? So, General here he said that the best solution was to kill the man quietly. He added that he would not be killed by Sadao but by his hired killers, professional killers, assassins. He would send two killers to Sadao's house that night or any night. Did not need to know about it. As the weather was warm those days, he wanted Sadao to act naturally and keep the door of the outer partition of the man's room open. As it opened into the garden, it would give easy access to the killers while the man was asleep. Certainly, it would be very natural, Sadao agreed. In fact, it is so left open every night. So Sadao he agreed that the idea seemed natural and he added that they did leave the door of the outer partition open at night. So I'll stop here. We'll continue in the next video and see whether the general assassins are able to kill that prisoner of war or not. Thank you.